Hello, my name is Renhua Ming. Welcome to Presidential Hackathon International Track exclusive program, in which we interview critical issues with distinguished figures. Being the digital minister, Audrey Tang often quotes the Dao De Jing clauses in interviews. In this episode, we are going to discover the features the digital minister found in Oriental philosophy echoes with technology.
Presidential Hackathon. The hacker spirit is always online.
Welcome back, Minister. Thank you for being with us today.
Sure.
So, it is already the third year that COVID-19 made a great impact to humans' daily lives. And as you mentioned in our last episode, that it makes travel harder, and of course, the carbon emission probably would reduce because of that. But from your observation, do you see any changes that human treats the environment or our world different due to COVID-19?
Definitely. I think for the first time, we see our neighbors as not people who live physically proximate to us, especially around the world when there's lockdowns. Well, it doesn't really matter who's your neighbor or not, right? But we find people who share a same value, on the same clarity of vision, a shared urgency, and then this internet imagined community suddenly become much more real compared to the physical exchange. So because of that, we've seen people working around the clock to develop not just the rapid testing or contact tracing, but also vaccines and so on, because there's a real shared urgency. And the clarity of vision means that what previously was holding us back from collaborating, including patents, when it comes to vaccination and so on, is suddenly not a problem anymore. The easy access to the scholarly articles, to the research data and things like that, all made it much more likely for someone in a different corner of the world to benefit from your data contributions and to get this data collaborative, this coalition going between the people who are working on the same problem. So I believe that we will carry this camaraderie, this solidarity forward to solve issues of a similar shared urgency, but with much more clarity than before, such as climate action.
And on that point, do you see that the COVID-19 actually accelerate how this society accepts digitalized their daily lives?
Yeah, I would say that in Taiwan, we do not feel it as much because we've never had a single day of lockdown in the past 2.5 years.
Correct.
But indeed, in other parts of the world, where there's no choice between the two hybrid modes of communication, there's this almost forced, coerced digital transformation going on, which actually made inequity worse in many corners of the world. So I would not pretend that it's a good thing overall. It's obviously not. Yeah, but it did make it much more likely that people who previously did not believe that anything could be done over video conference to nevertheless clear the cache in their mind and try it out for maybe the first time in a decade. It's not like these senior leaders didn't have video conferencing experience. It was just it's bad experience, right? So they, after having to try it during the pandemic times, discover although it's not like 100% there, maybe it's 80% there instead of a kind of negative experience overall. So as a result, we became much more likely to meet senior officials, my counterparts, over the internet during those 2.5 years, because previously it's either video conference but with just a junior working level, or if you want to meet senior leaders, it's always face-to-face. But nowadays there's no such restrictions.
So our next question is that, is there anything from Dao De Jing that you can refer to climate management from your point of view? Is there any wisdom that we can draw from Dao De Jing on climate or SDG matters?
Sure. So the Dao De Jing says to give no trust is to get no trust. 信不足焉，有不信焉, meaning that in order to work on something that is a shared urgency, we need to trust the citizens. We need to trust the next generation, the young people, who care probably on average more than our generation, and who is not constrained by the old way of thinking, of the business as usual and so on. We need to trust the people who are even too young to vote, to lead the social movements, that sets the norms around how we treat each other and also treat the environment. And that does take a leap of faith, because traditionally democratic countries are founded upon the idea of a well-informed citizenry, right? You have to be this year old to vote, this year old to get elected, this year old to be a president, and things like that, like the wisdom of seniority is respected. But in order to work on the climate action together, I think we need to flip that around and trust that even the youngest voices, for they are the main stakeholders when it comes to climate change.
So would you say that the top-down coercion kind of collapsed after COVID-19 and the digitalization?
Not at all, not uniformly at least. There are the jurisdictions that work on reinforcing digital authoritarianism using COVID as a excuse, well, as a reason anyway, as a rationale to rationalize social control through digital means, right? So there was recently this incident that the 健康码, the health code, the QR code that restricts infected people from traveling, suddenly in some nearby jurisdiction get repurposed so that people who work on civil society petitions are suddenly forbidden from traveling or using public transportation. And so I wouldn't say that top-down coercion collapses because of pandemic. Obviously, it made it much easier to get those authoritarianism, even surveillance statism into place in those jurisdictions. But on the other hand, I would agree with you that in some like less visible democratic society before the pandemic, like Taiwan and New Zealand, our models of working with the people, not just for the people, of working with the citizens, not just for the citizens, the civic tech use that we have seen that thrived during our work to counter the pandemic, and also in New Zealand and some smaller democratic countries. It did shine as an international model of not giving up on the core tenets of democracy, but actually making peer-to-peer co-production even more productive because of, as I mentioned, the sheer urgency and the clarity of purpose.
So, among other major Oriental philosophies, do you find Taoist theory matches the intrinsic value of civic hackers or civic hackathon the most?
I think the ideas of presidential hackathon is ultimately that of a plural one. That is to say, we welcome the innovations come from all the different corners of not just domestically our society, but from very different society that have a very different culture. Because we do believe that when people and people who do not necessarily share the same background work together, the tension, the conflict, the differences actually powers innovation, so that we can challenge each other to think out of the box, but then work on something that is a common purpose after all. And so collaboration across diversity, the kind of interplay between the yin and the yang, I do believe that this works very well with the central theme of our presidential hackathon.
So our next question is, what else do you think Taoism can inspire humans to live within nature or on climate?
Sure. So there's a saying that 道法自然, the Tao itself follows the nature. So this means that it's in opposition to the idea of 人定胜天, that the human will always triumph over the nature, right? In Taiwan, people don't say 人定胜天, right? Because we faced earthquakes, we faced typhoons. We wouldn't say that, oh, let's just geoengineer typhoons away. It seems rather difficult to do that, right? Very challenging. But in other jurisdictions, when the natural disasters are not this much part of the daily life, really there could be a kind of hubris that it's like we can industrialize and control nature and so on, which dominated the discussions of most of the industrialization in the previous centuries. But even today, the ideas of like optimizing everything, automating everything, a smart city without smart citizens and things like that kind of all speak to the same human triumph over environment instinct. So I do believe that Taoism offers us a sense of humility of being humble vis-a-vis not just the environment, but with future generations, of keeping an openness and interoperability and resilience in our designs so that people, as I mentioned, who are too young to vote, nevertheless has the ultimate say of what our designs would do. And of course, that fosters the kind of open and collaborative spirit that the presidential hackathon imbues in our each and every action and in our yearly planning.
So it's very good to know that our ancient wisdom echoes with presidential hackathon after probably 2,000 years later.
Oh yeah, the East Asia is not all Confucianism, you know.
Yes, of course. So thank you very much today, Digital Minister, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Next episode, we're going to talk about climate change and the SDG that involve with Presidential Hackathon Challenge theme. Thank you for watching the Presidential Hackathon International Track exclusive program. Presidential Hackathon, hacker spirit is always online. Until next time.
When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of beings. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that a singularity is near, well, let's always remember the plurality is here.